Joel Baird, the General Manager of Missoula Community Access Television, inviting you to another edition of What's Up Missoula. This series profiles nonprofit, civic, and government organizations in Missoula. And today we're going to visit with Chris Valinkity. She's the Executive Director of the Child Development Center. Chris, thanks for coming over.
Thanks for asking.
You're most welcome. And the first question, of course, I want to ask you is to give a context for the Child Development Center, or the CDC, I guess as it is known in its circle.
Okay, CDC stands for Child Development Center. That is a new name as about a year ago. We're located at Fort Missoula, and our specialty is children's development. We provide services to children and families who are at risk for a developmental disability or delay within 7 counties of western Montana, so it's pretty broad. It's a home-based model. We work in the family's home. We're private, not-for-profit, and we have offices in Missoula, at Fort Missoula, in Kalispell, and in Polson.
Right. And that is a very wide range area to take care of. Well, I'm going to try to generalize for people watching, too, for the services that typically, but I'm not sure, you can correct me. Do you deal with very small children who are infants only, and it has to do with the detection and diagnosis of potential developmental delays or disorders? Or do you work with kids all the way up to the age of
22.
Okay.
We do work with kids from 0 to 22. We believe that we are on board with early intervention, and we think that that's the best thing going for kids. The earlier you get in and provide assistance, the better they're going to do in life. So we have programs that fit all ages from 0 to 22.
Right. Now, typically, how do people contact you? Do you have referrals from a school? Do parents call with questions about their child's behavior? Is it a referral from physicians? Is it all 3 of those?
All of those things. And primarily, you always have to have the parents' consent to make a referral. But people call us with some information, and they may have noticed a delay. Maybe their child is not sitting up and they think he should be sitting up, or maybe their child is not talking yet and they think that it's the age the child should be talking. So they will call us and ask questions, and we can do some screens to see if maybe there is a concern, or if the child really is developing normally in all areas and they just need to give him a little more time. So we do lots of those kinds of questions, things, and that's how we take referrals. We get referrals from physicians, we get referrals from daycare centers, and from families or extended family members.
And it's an inclusive service then. So the Child Development Center personnel will do screening tests to try to identify if there's something that needs to be addressed, and also provide the service, the therapy, to address that problem once it's identified.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have one of 2 evaluation teams in the state. They are transdisciplinary teams. We have a medical director, and then licensed clinicians that have had years and years of experience working with little kids and kids up to the age of about 20. So they're very knowledgeable about development in the fields of psychology, cognitive development, speech and language, motor development, being both gross motor and fine motor, and life skills. So this team, if your child is referred and they decide to do an eval, take an arena look at the child so that they're looking at him all together as a whole person, and then they can make a diagnosis. At least what they will do to begin with is say, your child may have a delay, and they'll say your child has a delay in this area, it's this many months behind those other kids of his peers. These are some suggestions, and one of their suggestions many times is that they take advantage of our treatment program. And at that point, after the child, they also determine eligibility. We're private nonprofit, but we are funded by the government, and you have to meet eligibility criterion to be included in our program. And if you are, then you qualify for one of several programs that we offer to assist families.
Now, do you mean eligibility financially, eligibility in terms of the extent of the problem being addressed?
There's no financial eligibility at this point, never has been. It simply depends on whether or not the child is delayed and what percentage that delay is. And that's all statistically based on, are you just a little behind and need a little help? And then the eval team will give you some suggestions to take out at home. If they think that the problem may be a little more involved, then they put you on our treatment program, or it's voluntary, of course. If you want to participate, you can. And then, excuse me, and then you are assigned a family support specialist, and that person is trained in child development and disabilities. They travel to your home, and then they work with the family to teach the child and stimulate in ways that might not have been recognizable to the parent.
So it's kind of a parent education as well as a direct therapy for the child. So the parents are brought into the therapeutic loop so that they can use the same techniques or what might be used to correct the problem.
Absolutely. We believe, Joel, that there is no one more instrumental in that child's life than the parent. And they are the most consistent person in their life. So if we go in with our techniques and strategies and teach a parent about the child's disability, tell them where they can get other resources. Sometimes it's just talking and supporting the family as they come to terms with, gee, why isn't my child just like everybody else's? So they do all of those things. Our FSSs are very well trained in child development. And in parent language, they develop programs and a plan of care, or what we call them family support programs or family support plans, and identify things that the family needs to work on with the child. And they might model that. Some of those things aren't, things like object permanence or low muscle tone aren't, they're real common in our field, but most parents don't recognize those terms or know what to do about it.
Like, what is object permanence, for instance?
That means that when something is out of sight or goes away, it can come back. You can test for things to see if the child keeps looking to see if it comes back.
Okay. It's technical, then.
Well, it's pretty much about brain
sense.
Development and what comes first and what comes next and what things have to be in place before the child moves up. I think the motor area is probably the easiest one. Children usually need to sit up and crawl before they walk.
Right.
Speech develops in the same kind of way. First, kids make sounds, and then they imitate, and then pretty soon they have one word.
Right.
And they put two together. So there is a sequence, and not everyone knows that sequence, or how to get someone else to produce it. And that's what our personnel are trained in.
Sure, because in some instances you might identify a problem that a child is having and developing, but by giving this in-home therapy and education, that might help the child enormously overcome some delay in development.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the parent, once we leave the home, the parent does that in their daily routine. So the child is getting all this stimulation.
Right.
And right at the developmental place that they are so that they start to learn quickly.
Well, and we talked a little before we started taping the program. I mentioned to you that I thought the viewers that maybe are concerned about their child or know of a family or they're the aunt or the uncle and so on, that they might have a lot of obstacles in approaching or this problem and not wanting to recognize there might be a problem in the family. And you say, oh yeah, that's quite common. And that the Child Development Center personnel are very sensitive to these issues, and that people shouldn't be afraid to get in touch with the center if they have worries, if they have concerns. But now what would they expect, I guess, in terms of their own support or in terms of making that first call, I guess? What is the process? And I can't imagine you get that many calls from people without a referral, but maybe you do. And what happens if someone calls and they're just a layperson with a concern like this?
Maybe they just want some information to start out with.
Yeah.
You know, something about a specific skill. When should I expect my child to walk? They would be referred to a person with that kind of knowledge, and they would talk about it. As they talked about it, that person is trained to interview and find out exactly what the child is doing, how old they are, reasons for concern, premature babies, you know, whatever. Sure. And then they go through a series of questions if the family or the referral person is ready to make that referral. That gives us a profile of, sometimes on the phone you can say, my 12-month-old child is not walking. Well, that's perfectly normal.
Right.
You know, so.
You can be reassuring right off the bat that way.
Absolutely.
And then you mentioned the other part of the process, that the center will conduct an evaluation. If the questions aren't answered, if the parent or caregiver's concern is still there, the development center will conduct an evaluation for...
We are one of the 2 evaluation and diagnosis clinics in the state. Our team has worked together for over 10 years. They're very good, very professional, extremely sensitive and compassionate with families. We know this is a hard thing. You know, this is like going to a doctor and finding out, ooh, is there something wrong with me? So they're very sensitive about that, and they're also very reassuring. They do everything in a real, natural, family-based way, and then they talk to the folks about what are your questions and concerns. Why are you here? They do a series of standardized tests and meet with the family right away and give them the information that they found. It has very good reliability, because sometimes when you do this, you send a child to a speech therapist, a different appointment to a physical therapist, a different appointment to a psychologist. Our team and our medical director has all that information together, and they look at the child as a whole person. They look at the medical history and see if there are some reasons or red flags.
Right. And it's under one roof. It's sort of being viewed by the team. Oh, and that takes me to, I'm not following your questions as well as I should, the history of the Child Development Center. You'd mentioned that the core staff have been together for 10 years.
Now that is our evaluation team. Yeah. But actually we were, in 1960, we were started in the basement of the Missoula County Health Department with university professors and a couple health officers for kids that were born and needed to be diagnosed. Do they have a developmental disability? And of course at that time it was usually the recommendation of the physician that if the child was determined to have a disability, a developmental disability, that child be sent to an institution. And in 1970 that changed drastically. In 70, the enlightenment was, we probably need to provide community-based services for kids, because kids should be with their families.
Right.
And CDC was really the first community-based program for kids and families in the state. We were incorporated in 1975. In 1989, we started a program with the state that's a Medicaid waiver program for very, very involved children. And then in 1995, I think this is something really exciting about our field, the federal government adopted what they called at the time Part H, which was an addendum to IDEA, the federal legislation for children and education with kids with special needs. And at that time, I think the thing that makes this so exciting is it was our Congressman Pat Williams that introduced that legislation. And that he had done that at a request of his constituents, that a couple one that was based out of Missoula. And so we got some federal support to start providing support for little tiny kids 0 to 3 to help them through those beginning years. And that is an entitlement. Most of our services, we do have waiting lists, and they're limited. You can call and be ready to go, and if we don't have a slot open, chances of you getting services right away aren't right there. But if your child is 0 to 3, we have to put things together within 45 days and provide you services.
And that is part of the funding mechanism from the federal legislation, because you do have the funds to be able to deliver the service to kids of that age, give or take.
Supposedly.
Right.
Sometimes they cap it, but folks that we work with, that is our obligation. We serve every child 0 to 3 that meets our eligibility criteria.
Yeah. Well, and what you were talking about is a pretty startling shift in the way the culture has decided to deal with difference in their midst, or at least we imagine this. You can almost imagine a time in the old days where everyone was kept in their family, regardless of what abilities they had. And then it started to get a little more industrial, and like, well, we'll take everyone who's different and we'll send them away to the state school or what have you. And you're saying that's about where the state of Montana was in the 60s. Lots of kids with differences were being lumped together with all the other kids with differences because that seemed like the right thing to do. That philosophy changed to, I guess people called it mainstreaming at one time, and I think, are they calling it inclusion now?
And community integration.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting field to be in, because I started back in 1975.
Yeah,
so
oh my
to watch, and went to the institution in 1972 and thought there must be a better way to do this. And so it's very exciting to see all the changes.
And the Child Development Center has really taken that inclusion to heart, because you're going right to the family.
Yes.
And trying to and it makes so much sense in that the parents are going to provide the greatest care and the most consistent stimulus or training for the children. That is something. So you're coming on 30 years next year.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We it's just been incredibly cost effective for the state. It has promoted a much better quality of life and more advancement for kids. But mostly it's the right thing to do, because kids belong in families.
Right.
And so that is really very gratifying in what we do.
I'm going to make sure I have met your questions. Well, should we talk a little bit about the cost and how, I can imagine having this number of specialists and evaluations are not an expensive service to provide. What happens to the families that can't afford? Is it a sliding fee scale, or meet the eligibility and there's a fixed affordable rate? How does that work, the fee for service?
We actually don't have any parent contribution. It's free of cost or free of charge, both our services and our evaluations. However, if your child meets the eligibility.
Right.
However, we do ask when we go in, because we're trying to spread our resources over an increasing number, especially as Western Montana
grows in population.
So, so we always say to the parent, okay, what do you have? These are the sorts of things your child needs. What can you offer and what can you do? And then we work out our support plan around a parent contribution. Yeah. But that parent is a coach. We want to keep that kid involved with their family. So
you've been alluding a little, and I don't know if you want to talk about the funding mechanism and how well that is going right now.
Actually, it's been really very difficult over the last several years. We did lose the Part C program on the floor of the Senate during the last legislative session and managed to have it replaced. So we're always very worried about that.
And that is at the state level? You're
Yes,
talking about the
at
state
level,
legislature?
because we contract with the state. And so funds are tight. Things are hard for Montana, but this is a program that saves money. You know, if you look at what happened in 1960, when babies were institutionalized at the cost of $125,000 a year,
Yeah.
we serve them for $5,000 a year. They advance, you know, quicker to their maximum. We can minimize the effects of the disability.
Sure. And it's much more
Human.
inclusive, yeah. And humane almost seems patronizing in a way, you know, to say, oh, you're so humane to that person or something. But here's a good question. I know it's your last, but if we've forgotten anything, we can talk about it. What can other community members do to assist the Child Development Center?
Well, we do have a huge need for, first I'll talk about another program we have called Respite Care, if I can, for a minute. Respite Care actually was started by families that went to the Montana legislature and said, you know, we are constant caregivers. We could do this if we just had an occasional break. So we have some funding that will allow families to hire someone. They are the person that hires their provider, and they get a break from the constant caregiving. If
Sure.
it's to go to the grocery store or go out to dinner or whatever it is. We also, in Missoula, decided that we had a lot of kids, number one, that would, sometimes kids with challenging behaviors have crisis periods in their
Sure.
life. Also, we had a need for quality people to provide respite care. So we built a respite house on the Fort Missoula campus,
Oh, I didn't know that.
and it's right next to our agency, and so you can drop your child off at the, you should schedule with respite provider. They're a independent contractor for the weekend or whatever. You can also hire Uncle Bob if he's the person most qualified to care for your child.
Yeah.
So we provide resources for that as well as a place, and that's a very, very important issue for parents. We have constant need for respite providers all over the 7 counties, and also for habilitation aids. So if you have some experience, that's really something that we're looking for. And we recruit all the time. There's always a need and a good match, especially fellas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we tend to get more women than we do men. And we have lots of boys we serve on our caseload. Secondly, you can make a private contribution if you are a business in the community. CDC would like to be your charity of choice.
Sure.
You may, you know, obituaries, when they ask, where would you like donations sent if you don't want flowers? Certainly, that's a wonderful thing to do, and most of our families make sure that that happens if there's a death in their
Yeah.
family. And finally, you need to vote, and you need to talk to your legislature about preventative programs for kids with differing abilities. And what is their stand about supporting that? It is cost effective, but we as citizens need to ask that question of every politician that comes to our door, if we really believe that this is an important thing to do, because that's where our funding comes from.
Sure. Well, great. Chris, is there anything we didn't cover?
Well, I don't think so.
I'm sure there is, but I guess we'll give ourselves a little rest, too. Once again, I'd like to remind people we've been visiting with Chris Volinkedy, and she is the Executive Director of the Child Development Center here in Missoula at Fort Missoula. Oh, and Chris, the phone number to call is?
Our phone number here in Missoula is 549-6413. We also have a toll-free number, although in Missoula County, it would all be local, I believe.
Right.
Oh, I think maybe it's long distance from Sealy Lake. And that number is, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can read it, 1-800-914-4779.
You did that right. It's 1-800-914-4779. All right, thanks again, Chris,
You
for
bet, Joel,
spending
and thank
time.
you for the opportunity.
Most welcome. If you know of an organization you'd like to see on this program, give us a call at MCAT. The number here is 542-6228. Thanks for watching this edition of What's Up Missoula. For MCAT, I'm Joel Baird. I'll see you the next time. I know this is important.
Oh.